A violent storm was tearing through the valley, thunder crashing, rain pouring like never before. That's when a lone cowboy spotted something in the distance, barely moving. As he got closer, his heart dropped. It was a horse, injured, shaking, and moments away from collapse. But what the cowboy did next, no one saw coming. Instead of walking away, he made a decision that would risk everything: his safety, his life, even his future. And what happened in the next few minutes will leave you absolutely speechless. The sky had been growing darker since the afternoon, though the sun had not yet set. Thick clouds rolled slowly across the horizon, covering the open land in a dull gray light. The wind picked up little by little, moving through the tall grass and carrying a quiet sense of unease. Ethan Cole noticed it early. He had spent most of his life out here, riding across the same wide fields, watching the seasons change. Storms were nothing new to him, but this one felt different. There was a heaviness in the air that made him sit a little straighter in the saddle. His horse shifted beneath him, restless in a way that did not go unnoticed. Ethan looked toward the distant hills. "We should head back," he said softly, more to himself than to the horse. The first drop of rain landed on his hand, cold and sharp. Then another followed. Within moments, the sky opened, and the rain began to fall in thick sheets. The wind grew stronger, pushing against him as he turned his horse toward home. Thunder rolled across the valley, deep and heavy. Ethan kept his head down and urged his horse forward, but something in the distance caught his eye. At first, it was nothing more than a dark shape on the ground, almost hidden by the rain. He might have ignored it if not for the way it seemed out of place. He slowed. The shape did not move. For a moment, he considered riding on. The storm was getting worse, and stopping now would only make things harder. But something held him there. He turned his horse slightly and moved closer, the rain stinging his face as he looked ahead. As he approached, the shape became clear. It was a horse. It lay on its side in the mud, its coat soaked and clinging to its body. One of its legs was bent at an angle that did not look right. Its sides rose and fell unevenly, each breath shallow and strained. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He dismounted quickly, his boots sinking into the wet ground. The rain poured down around him, but he hardly noticed it now. All his attention was on the animal in front of him. The horse lifted its head slightly as he came closer. Its eyes met his, wide and uncertain. It tried to move, but the effort only brought a weak sound of pain. "Easy," Ethan said quietly, raising a hand. He stepped closer, slow and careful. The horse watched him, tense at first, then still. There was fear there, but something else too. Something that made Ethan pause. He could leave. He knew that. The storm was not letting up, and night was coming. There was no one else around for miles. Staying here would be a risk he did not need to take. But as he stood there in the rain, looking at the injured horse struggling to breathe, the thought of turning away did not sit right with him. Ethan let out a long breath and glanced once toward the direction of home. Then he looked back at the horse. And in that quiet moment, with the storm closing in around them, he knew he was not going anywhere. The rain grew heavier with each passing minute, soaking through Ethan's shirt and running down his face. The wind pressed against him from the side, making it harder to stand steady on the slick ground. Still, he stayed where he was. The horse shifted slightly, then stopped, as if even that small movement was too much. Its breathing was uneven, each breath shallow and quick. Ethan could see the strain in its body, the way its sides rose and fell with effort. He moved a step closer. "It's all right," he said quietly, keeping his voice low and steady. The horse's ears flicked at the sound. Its eyes stayed fixed on him, watching every movement. There was fear there, but it was not wild. It was the kind of fear that came from pain and exhaustion. Ethan crouched down beside it, ignoring the mud that soaked into his knees. He reached out slowly, giving the animal time to react. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the horse let out a soft breath and lowered its head back to the ground. Taking that as a sign, Ethan placed his hand gently against its neck. The coat was cold and soaked, but beneath it he could feel the warmth of life still holding on. "You've been out here a while," he murmured. He shifted his attention to the injured leg. Even in the dim light and heavy rain, it was clear something was badly wrong. The leg was twisted in a way that made his stomach tighten. He had seen injuries before, but this one would not heal on its own. Not out here. Ethan sat back on his heels for a moment, his mind working through the situation. There was no way the horse could stand, let alone walk. The nearest shelter was far, and the storm was only getting worse. If he left now to get help, the animal might not survive until he returned. He looked out across the open land. The rain blurred everything, turning the distance into a gray wall. There was no sign of anyone else, no movement, no light. Just him and the horse. Ethan wiped the rain from his face with the back of his hand and stood up. His horse waited a few steps away, shifting uneasily but staying in place. He walked over and untied the rope from the saddle, his movements quick but controlled. He returned to the injured horse and looked around, searching for anything he could use. A few broken branches lay scattered nearby, likely torn down by the wind. They were not much, but it was something. Kneeling again, he began to work. He pushed the branches into the ground to create a rough frame, then tied the rope between them, pulling it tight. The rain made everything harder. His hands slipped, and the rope grew heavy with water. Still, he kept going. The horse watched him, its head resting low but its eyes following every move. "I need to move you," Ethan said softly, more to keep himself steady than anything else. "It's the only way." He hesitated before touching the animal again. He knew it would hurt. There was no way around that. Carefully, he slid his arms beneath its body, bracing himself. "Easy now," he said. As he lifted, the horse cried out, a sharp sound that cut through the noise of the storm. Ethan froze for a moment, holding it steady, letting it settle. "I know," he said under his breath. "I know." Bit by bit, he adjusted his grip and shifted the horse onto the rough support he had made. It was not perfect, but it would have to do. When he finally stepped back, breathing hard, he looked at what he had built. It was fragile and uneven, but it might hold long enough. The storm showed no sign of slowing. Ethan glanced once more toward the direction of home, then back at the horse lying in the mud, barely holding on. He tightened his grip on the rope. "All right," he said quietly. "We're getting out of here." And with that, he began to pull. The rope pulled tight in Ethan's hands as he leaned his weight forward. The makeshift support dragged slowly across the wet ground, leaving a deep trail in the mud behind it. Every step felt heavier than the last. Rain poured down without pause, soaking everything. It ran into his eyes and blurred his vision, but he did not stop. He set his jaw and kept moving, one step at a time. The horse lay still at first, its body shifting only slightly with each pull. Then it let out a low sound, a quiet sign of pain that carried through the storm. Ethan slowed but did not stop. "Just a little farther," he said, though he could barely hear his own voice. The land ahead rose gently toward a patch of higher ground. Somewhere beyond it, he remembered an old shed. It had been years since he had seen it, and he did not even know if it was still standing. But it was the only place he could think of. He pulled again. The mud clung to his boots, trying to hold him back. More than once, his foot slipped, and he nearly lost his balance. Each time, he caught himself and kept going. His arms ached from the strain, and his shoulders burned, but he refused to let go of the rope. A flash of lightning lit up the valley for a brief second. In that moment, he caught a glimpse of the path ahead. The rise was still a distance away. Too far, his body told him. He ignored it. The wind shifted, blowing harder now, pushing against him as if trying to force him back. Ethan lowered his head and leaned into it. The rope dug into his palms, rough and unyielding. Behind him, the horse moved its head slightly, then went still again. Its breathing was still there, faint but steady enough to keep him going. "Stay with me," he said, not turning around. Step by step, he dragged the weight forward. Time seemed to stretch, each moment blending into the next. There was no clear sense of how long he had been moving, only the constant effort and the sound of the storm around him. Then his foot slipped. He fell hard onto one knee, the impact sending a sharp pain up his leg. The rope slackened for a moment, and the support shifted slightly in the mud. Ethan stayed there, breathing hard. For a second, he did not move. The thought came to him then, quiet but clear. He could stop. No one would know. No one would blame him. The storm was too strong, the task too much for one man alone. He closed his eyes, letting the rain hit his face. Behind him, the horse made a small movement. Its head lifted just enough to brush against his arm before falling back again. Ethan opened his eyes. He looked back at the animal, at the way it lay there, worn down but still holding on. "That's it," he said quietly, almost to himself. "You're not done yet." He pushed himself up slowly, ignoring the pain in his leg. His grip tightened around the rope once more. "Neither am I." He leaned forward again and pulled. This time, something shifted. Not the storm, not the weight, but inside him. The doubt that had crept in began to fade, replaced by something steadier. The ground beneath him began to rise. The climb was harder, but it meant he was getting closer. Another flash of lightning lit the sky. And this time, through the rain, he saw it. A dark outline against the gray. The shed. It was still standing. Ethan let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. "Almost there," he said. And he kept going. By the time Ethan reached the shed, his arms felt like they would give out at any moment. The final stretch had been the hardest. The ground was uneven, and the mud grew thicker near the entrance. Still, he did not stop. He pulled the support through the open doorway and into the dim space inside. The roof creaked under the weight of the rain, but it held. The wind was weaker here, and for the first time since he had found the horse, there was some cover. Ethan dropped the rope and stood there for a moment, breathing hard. The quiet felt strange after the storm outside. Rain still fell, steady and loud against the roof, but inside the shed it was different. Slower. Duller. Enough to think. He moved quickly again. There was a pile of old hay in one corner, dry in places. He gathered what he could and spread it out on the ground, brushing away damp patches with his hands. It was not much, but it would keep the horse off the cold earth. "All right," he said under his breath. Carefully, he crouched beside the horse and slid his arms beneath it once more. This time, he worked slower, trying to keep the injured leg as still as possible. The horse tensed and let out a low sound, but it did not struggle. "That's it," Ethan said. "Easy." He shifted it onto the hay and adjusted its position until it lay as comfortably as it could. When he finally stepped back, he noticed how still the animal had become. Too still. For a brief moment, worry rose in his chest. Then the horse drew a breath. Shallow but there. Ethan exhaled and ran a hand through his wet hair. He looked around the shed. It was bare except for a few broken tools and a rusted lantern hanging from a nail. He walked over and picked it up, turning it in his hands. After a few tries, it caught, and a small flame flickered to life. The light filled the space with a soft glow. Ethan brought it closer to the horse and knelt beside it again. Now he could see the injury clearly. The leg was swollen, the shape wrong. He knew he could not fix it fully, not here. But he could try to keep it steady. He tore a strip from the bottom of his shirt and folded it over itself. Then he found 2 straight pieces of wood from the broken tools and placed them along the sides of the injured leg. "Hold still," he murmured. With careful hands, he wrapped the cloth around the leg, tying it as firmly as he could without making it worse. The horse flinched once, then settled again. When he finished, he sat back and looked at his work. It was not perfect. It might not even be enough. But it was something. He rested his hand lightly on the horse's neck. The warmth was still there, faint but steady. Its breathing had not changed much, but it had not gotten worse either. "You made it," he said quietly. The storm outside began to lose its strength. The wind softened, and the sound of the rain slowly eased. The worst of it had passed. Ethan leaned back against the wooden wall of the shed. Every part of his body ached. His clothes were soaked, his hands raw from the rope, and his legs heavy with exhaustion. For a while, he just sat there, watching the slow rise and fall of the horse's breathing. The lantern flickered beside him, casting long shadows across the walls. At some point, his eyes began to close. He did not fight it. The last thing he saw before sleep took him was the horse, lying quietly on the hay, still holding on. And for now, that was enough. Morning came quietly. The storm had moved on during the night, leaving behind a washed and still world. Soft light spilled through the broken gaps in the shed walls, touching the hay and the wooden floor in pale gold. Ethan opened his eyes slowly. For a moment, he did not remember where he was. His body felt heavy, stiff from sleep on the rough ground. Then he turned his head and everything came back. The horse. He pushed himself up immediately, ignoring the pain in his joints. The lantern had burned out, leaving only daylight to fill the space. The horse was still there. Still breathing. Ethan exhaled slowly, relief settling in his chest. He moved closer and knelt beside it. The animal's eyes were open now, calm but tired. It lifted its head slightly when it saw him. "Hey there," Ethan said softly. He checked the bandaged leg. It was still injured, but it had held through the night. That alone felt like a small victory. Outside, the air was fresh and clean. The storm had left the land soaked, but peaceful. Birds had started to return, their distant calls carrying through the morning. Ethan sat back on his heels and looked at the horse for a long moment. Something had changed during the night, not just in the animal, but in him as well. He reached out and placed a steady hand on its neck. "We made it," he said quietly. The horse did not move away. It did not need to. After a while, Ethan stood and walked to the doorway of the shed. The valley stretched out before him, quiet and open under the morning sky. The world felt different now, like the storm had taken something heavy with it when it left. He turned back once more. The horse was watching him. And for the first time since the storm began, Ethan smiled. This was not just a story about a storm or a rescue. It was about a moment when everything could have gone wrong, and still, someone chose to stay. Ethan did not plan for any of it. He did not expect to find anything that day. But sometimes life changes in the middle of the worst weather, when decisions are made without time to think, only time to act. And in that quiet shed, something small but important happened. A bond was formed in silence, through effort, pain, and patience. The storm passed, but what remained was something stronger than it. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on it. Not every act of kindness is large or seen by many. Some of them happen far away, in silence, when no one is watching. If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe for more emotional stories like this, and share it with someone who believes that even small choices can make a big difference.